I'm Eric Barden.
I'm Amy Barden.
And welcome to BomBardened podcast. A little bit about me. I spent 38 years in the Seattle Police Department, retired recently as the Deputy Chief of Police, had an opportunity to learn about policing and public safety from that perspective. It's also where I met my beautiful wife, Amy, Dr. Barden.
So my career was almost the opposite. I spent 20 years in nonprofit administration, primarily child welfare, foster care, really analyzing what interventions work, what do we know about human behavior, what predictably would help someone redirect their life. And so I moved back to Seattle, and I was recruited to a public safety job in the city, designing the alternative to policing, actually. And I met this guy in a crime statistics meeting. And I said something cheeky, I guess, and he asked to have coffee, and now here we are doing a podcast.
I asked to have coffee to learn more about her job and what she did in the city, but really I had ulterior motives.
So it has been interesting. I describe this all the time, spending time in the law enforcement space, in criminal justice. I'm out with first responders all the time. I get to see the world a little bit more through the lens of enforcement and accountability. And it's been very interesting and I hope useful to bring Eric into my world, to be able to see how and when people change, and that there are folks where on paper you would think they would never be safe in community. And they've become brilliant leaders and family members and contributing members of society. And so what we debate a lot is how and when people can change. What are the implications of addiction? I don't think we talk about that a lot, that many of the crimes that plague our societies are following substance use disorder. And we're not really addressing that because we don't want to criminalize addiction.
Well, yeah, there's that. And there's also the point to be made that when we think about drug crimes and we think about addiction, we think about drug use, drug possession, drug sales, that sort of thing, not recognizing that the vast majority of crimes that are committed across all different types of crime have a nexus to drug use and to drug addiction and to mental health issues. And mental health issues lead to addiction, and addiction leads to mental health issues.
Yeah, it has been interesting to realize that in all the cities that I'm in, that corollary between substance use and crime. And people have debated me on that, saying, no, there's no data to support that. And I would say that's because we don't drug test everyone, right? Yeah. But you can actually look at 911 call data, what was observable, what did we hear? You can look at police data and fire data, and you start to get closer to that reality. And what pains me is we don't really do anything to intervene until someone is really far into the crisis. Yep. So when you were running narcotics, or when you were an officer, how did you see the problem and the solution? I mean, did you feel like we just need to make more arrests and we'll book someone and they'll get clean?
I think I operated under the same presumptions that many people do, which is that the deterrent impact of potential arrest is enough to keep people from committing crimes and from using illegal substances. And clearly, over time, you learn that that's not at all the case, and that people will continue to use drugs. I mean, that's the very definition of addiction, is that you will continue to make a choice that results in extremely negative repercussions in your own life. People lose their families, they lose their jobs, they lose their spouses, they lose their children, to the point regarding so many crimes being connected with drug use. Well, the answer, and we also, if we know that putting him in jail for 2 days,
it's not a deterrent.
It's not a deterrent. In fact, they're just going to Jones in jail and then sprint to the closest drug dealer that they can find upon release. We haven't done anything. That's why cops are always talking about wash, rinse, repeat. We just keep arresting the same people over and over and over again. So we have got to do something different. We have got to interrupt these cycles that are creating the environment where these folks are committing crimes day in and day out. And arresting is a vital component of that, but that alone cannot solve the problem.
Yeah, I want to see diversion first. I really believe in prevention and diversion. I think that, the diversion court models that work, it's because there's a deterrent, right? I believe if you send a diversion specialist out and say, listen, the next call is going to be police, right? This is illegal. This is unlawful. We're not going to let you die on the street. But I think if there's a real deterrent like that, what is this face? I think if there's a real deterrent like that, a lot of people, if they
you
think they
wag
can,
your finger at the addict and
I'm just
say,
saying
now
there's a real
next time,
consequence.
you can be sure I'm going to call the police.
No, I don't mean next time. I mean right now. I've described that in Albuquerque. Their alternative unit, ACS, when I was out with them, there was somebody that was on a median, right? It's unlawful, and it's at great risk to the person and the public. But that department, they don't do anything that's not consent-based. So the ACS responders were like, listen, you have to move. The next call is going to be police.
You're going to get a
No, the next call is going to be police, and they're going to
ticket.
come move you, right? It wasn't like we're going to walk away and do nothing. There was an actual consequence.
And that's fine. That's fantastic. And that's a great example of changing an immediate behavior that's occurring. But if we're talking about addiction, we have to have ongoing 24/7, 365 accountability for the decision making, because an addict will do whatever it takes to use.
I agree. But the people that I know who they feel like they elected into a diversion court, right? Whether we're talking about substance use, mental health, there's all sorts of different types of therapeutic courts. The truth is, if there wasn't the deterrent, I have felony charges, I'm going to do time. People tell me I would never have elected into
100%.
it. I was so far gone. And so I still think it's more palatable, and it should be. The person feels some accountability, some responsibility, saying, I'm going to try this, even if they know it's sort of a false choice. I think it's better psychologically. I just think we should try first. I think you should always try diversion before you use coercion.
Yeah. No, and this is great. And because we come at these things from such a different original perspective, and I think the programs that we've seen, and we've been looking at this very, very closely, the programs that we've seen that have been successful marry accountability, honesty. Yeah. In other words, I'm going to tell you stuff you don't want to hear, because the only way we're going to change behavior here is to address some uncomfortable things. Accountability on top of compassion, allowing people to continue to a destructive course is not compassionate at all. Allowing people to sleep in their own feces in a homeless encampment is not compassion.
Yeah. Yeah, I've talked about that a lot. That looks like bootstraps thinking. And it's interesting to me because it's generally a more academic, sort of progressive left audience that is suggesting autonomy, dignity. But I feel like under that is make a different choice, right? You make a different choice and you'll be better. And I feel like, what are we doing?
We've sort of debunked just saying no as a society, our collective understanding. But I think it's even greater than that, because we still think that, gosh, in the face of this overwhelming negative impact to my life, I would make a different choice.
Right.
Well, you're not an addict, because if you weren't, that person who's the addict would have made a different choice too when they weren't an addict.
Right. So our guest today is going to illuminate and surface a lot of these issues we're talking about. Ginny Burton is a warrior, a fierce advocate for recovery, for interventions that actually work. So excited to talk to Ginny today.
Thank you both so much for having me.
So I met Ginny about 1.5 years ago. And I remember the first thing that I knew about you was that photo, the side-by-side, where you look like you're on the brink of death, absolutely wrecked, probably by addiction is what I thought. And then this gorgeous photo and cap and gown at UW. And I learned that, Eric, you saw that a few years ago, right?
I had seen that picture years ago, and it is one of the most compelling pictures I've ever seen. You see this person that looks to be near death next to this beautiful woman in cap and gown. And it's a fantastic redemption story. And we know that now you have taken that experience and are helping folks. But before we get into that part, I'd like to talk about, how did you get into the mess to begin with?
Yeah, a lot of people want to hear about the mess and how I got there. So I was born into the mess. So my parents were drug addicts. And as a small child, I didn't really know that they were drug addicts. So I just was a kid trying to do kid things. And Dad ended up going to prison when I was 4 years old. He was honorably discharged from the military, but then, of course, was an addict and an alcoholic, and apparently was caught up in some extracurricular activity outside of his regular day job. And so I watched our house be raided when I was 4. And then a few short years later, my mom introduced me to drugs. And that's really what started the spiral. The interesting thing is that I wasn't really trying to do drugs. I was just really reaching for acceptance, I think. And what I recognized was that in that process of being introduced and not wanting to participate, was that what it did get me was love and acceptance from somebody that I was really desiring to be loved and accepted by, which was my mom. So it started a spiral, and then I started to really understand that it provided an escape as well. Life was very violent. My mom was in and out of different relationships and insanity. Our houses were drug houses, and life was just chaotic. And so eventually what drugs became were my intimate relationship. And it was my escape. It was my method of coping. And so despite wanting something very different, because as a young child, I was tested as gifted, and I had an academic plan for my life. I wanted to become an attorney, and that's what I was going to do, but that's not what happened. I did get a very detailed education on the other side of the law. And I'll say this, is that I'm very grateful for all of it. I'm really grateful for all of it. And for a really long time, I wondered why God would play such a nasty trick on a person. Like, why was I on this earth? I tried everything in my power to die, either die by cop, die by homicide, or die by suicide. And I was very unsuccessful in all of those things. I did rack up a lot of felony charges and misdemeanor charges, and I'm grateful for it, because what those periods of time did is they gave me a separation. They removed me from the destructive path of my choices. And that's, like, I have such a problem with what we're doing in today's world, because yes, there's this idea that you can't arrest your way out of things, but those arrests gave me opportunities for clarity.
Yeah.
They gave me the ability to sit still long enough to recognize that something needed to change. And that's what I do today. I've developed a process based on what I had to do in my own life, because I got arrested the last time at the age of 40, which was over 12 years ago. And I have made a decision that I am going to reconstruct our carceral facilities so that people like me can find their way out.
When were you in the throes of addiction? That picture that shows you, with sores and gaunt and obviously extremely unhealthy. When was that photo taken?
That was in 2005. So I was in the throes of extreme addiction for a really long time. I mean, I was using hard narcotics from about 12 years old on. And I had some periods of separation. I went to prison in 1996, so I was clean for almost 14 months then. I went back to prison again in 1997, so I was clean for 3.5 years at that point. I got out and stayed clean for about 18 months after that, almost 2 years, and then ended up relapsing. And had a couple of times where I had gained some traction with recovery. So I'd started participating in a 12-step program. I did again end up relapsing. So I was really in the intense throes of addiction for probably more than 20 years.
So when you were done with one of your stints in prison, and you obviously had to be clean in prison, when you got out, you were able to last 18 months before you started using again. Did you have anyone helping you prepare for that, or was that just your own intestinal fortitude to stay clean once you got out for that period of time?
Well, it was a little bit of both. I was a member of Narcotics Anonymous. So 12-step program. I was introduced to the 12-step program when I was in prison. And what that did was that helped me to align with other people that use drugs the way that I did, who were actually staying clean. And there's this huge, I think, unspoken strength when it comes to peer relationships, right? And we're using that model in things like mental health and things like that today. But really, those things originated in, 12-step, where, you align yourself with other folks that are moving in the same direction. And we can see how that actually works with everything, right? Different kinds of employment, education, people that ride bikes, that climb mountains, that box. Like, if
Community.
you 100%, 100% community. And we practice allomimetic behavior, right? We watch what other people do and we follow suit.
Right.
And that's what I do today professionally as I go in and I bring other folks in that are able to be identified with the populations that I work with. And we share our experiences of overcoming hope and strength. And what happens is that the people inside of these institutions then believe that it's possible for them too.
Yeah. People need to believe it's an option. It's a possibility. And I mean, to your point, you were raised in an environment where the drug use was the environment. That's what you thought people did.
Well, that's the community. That's the normal practice. And so, I mean, we know the best predictor of generational cycles is the generational cycle.
Right.
Whatever I grow up around, it's normal. So, Eric, 38 years in policing and law enforcement, my whole career has been in this space of when and how people change, what's required. And it was really interesting to come into the public sector for the first time, to be looking at crime and crisis. And, I think of those as the same thing, right? Self-destructive behavior. And to recognize we actually have lost what is required to change. And you always have to have accountability. You have to have compassion and support and really get to know somebody's unique circumstances, what's going on here. We talk about like root causes, right? That stuff, in my experience, it takes a long time to get after that, to become an authority on yourself. But I'm always trying to translate for the public. You can't have only law and justice and no support, no holistic, comprehensive approach. And you also can't do nothing.
Right.
And back to your comment on arrest, I was in a meeting yesterday and I said, think about that term. It means to stop, to abate. We should always want better for people. We should want to stop the cycle. But I know that we are booking people and they're not getting any help. They're not getting any treatment. And that's something Eric talks a lot about because he was over narcotics, right?
Yeah, I'm going to get into that because that's a huge topic to me. But foundationally, I think it's really important. The average person hears the word addiction and thinks, oh, it must be tough. It must be, it's something that, I'm not an addict, so I don't know what that's like. Tell us how you've had consequences for your actions that were not knowing any of the specifics, I'm going to bet were directly related to your drug use and your addiction.
Yeah.
So you're out. I mean, this is to me fascinating. You're out for 18 months. You've got to be. That's a long time.
Yeah.
For an addict.
Somebody that's never been clean that long.
That's a long time, and you've got to be proud of yourself that you know what, I can do this. And yet, even then, something happened, something triggered, and you made a different decision and went back onto the course of that was very negative. But one of the things that I learned through 15 years in narcotics enforcement is average people think about it as, well, you have to make a different choice. Well, yeah, that's easy to say, but tell me what it's like for an addict. What does the word addict mean, and why would someone who's doing well and has 18 months of sobriety make a decision to go back? What is addiction? Tell me that.
Yeah, well, I think everybody can identify with addiction, though we tend to other ourselves and other people. So if you like chocolate cake or fried chicken, or if there are any behaviors, and I think that we all possess something that we do in excess, it's just that sometimes what you might do in excess might not destroy your life, right? So there's that. So I never wanted to do drugs. I recognized the destructive nature of what was going on in my family. And I felt like I was living a contradiction even from the moment that I took the first hit, because I knew that it was not good. However, the desire for love and acceptance overrode knowing that that was not the right thing to do. And then what happened is my human nature, my patterned behavior, and my fleshly weakness truly overtook every bit of common sense. But there was always sort of this little flame inside of me that knew that I was going in the wrong direction. but I didn't have the skill set or the bandwidth or the drive to change it because the relationship, it was an intimate relationship with substances that helped me to navigate all of the things that had been happening, all of the messages that had been being said to me that I then turned into my own message. So addiction is just sort of a warm, intimate relationship with a substance that becomes that loving hug that you want from your mom, you know, and
It's
for
like
some,
the relief.
it is.
Yeah.
Or that really passionate, intimate relationship that you have with that individual that makes you want to go back over and over again. It is also that. So it becomes everything to you. And I had one of the most unique experiences with my addiction and understanding how addiction manifests in my life when I got loaded the last time after my mom died. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what caused me to relapse. My grandmother passed away. My grandmother was one of the most important people in my life, and I didn't know how to navigate my emotions. So in all of the different things that I did while I was in prison, which wasn't a lot, I didn't have the right kind of charges. I didn't have drug charges. So I didn't qualify for treatment. But I fought for it and I got treatment.
That just enrages me. I mean, that is so simple.
It is really simple. I ended up getting the treatment, but one of the problems with a lot of the services that we have in our society here in the United States is that they're very one-dimensional. So they can educate you about whatever said problem is, but they don't really teach you how to navigate your life outside of it in a holistic kind of way. So, so when my grandmother passed away, the emotional pain was immense. I was also ending a relationship with somebody, and that also was immense. And I was also in the process of trying to get my kids back, but feeling like I was inadequate, and that was immense. And I allowed myself to take the way out that would eliminate all responsibility, and that was to use drugs. And what happened for me was all of my tissue woke back up, and it said, what in the heck have you been denying us for?
Right.
And it just took everything away. And immediately I was back in the throes of what my life had been for a long time. So I wanted to share just a little bit. When my mom passed away in 2011, I had made the decision to use again. Now, mind you, I had gotten out of prison about a year before, and I had relapsed a couple of times. But when she passed away, and mind you, that was also one of the most traumatic relationships I had ever had in my life. But there was, you know, people call it trauma bond. I hate the word trauma because I think it's really overused these days. And I think it is. It's become an excuse.
Well, your opinion traumatizes me now.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's lost all meaning.
Right. Yeah. And so I think it's really overused. But what, you know, there was, my mother and I sort of grew up in the throes of insanity together. Yeah. And regardless of my opinion, as I was growing up, I have to recognize that we're building the plane as we fly it as human beings, right? And sometimes we don't have the skill sets that we need to be able to help our children build the skills that they need to be successful. And so I've learned to forgive her. However, I started using, though I didn't want to, and I couldn't stop once I started. And that was the huge thing for me. And so for an addict like myself, and this is what gives me understanding. But I'll tell you, I also fall under the label of, you know, well, they should just stop doing it. Because I do that all the time, even though I know, right? Currently in a battle with food right now. But anyways, that's a whole other conversation for another podcast. But once I started, I couldn't stop. When an individual who has had a long-term relationship with drugs puts drugs into their body, it wakes up a beast that is so much bigger than that individual. And that is why the separation without drugs, without medication-assisted treatment, without adulterants is so necessary.
Yeah. What do you know the current data point on relapse? It's like 7 or 9 times like the average if you were in the throes really of addiction.
I don't know any statistics on relapse right now.
Yeah. I just, when people ask me about this in the public, again, why don't they just stop? Especially with a drug like fentanyl, you know it is lethal. It's going to kill you. And that's usually my response is, have you ever tried to change anything? Tried to break a habit? I just don't know people who improve in a straight line. You know, I don't generally hear that story that I put it down and I never returned.
There are definitely some. I know lots of people who have. We're dealing with different beasts today, though. And it's not just the fentanyl. I brought my daughter's dad home And we were helping him kick fentanyl in the upstairs
Wow.
bedroom of my house recently. And I'm going to tell you that my heroin kicks were worse than what he was going through.
Is that right?
And I was,
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, I was waiting to have somebody in my life that I know that was on fentanyl need to come and kick at my house so I could actually see. Because I didn't use fentanyl and I'm not willing to go test the theory of
Please
it.
do
Let
not.
me find out.
Please do not.
No interest there. It was long and uncomfortable for him, but it wasn't as extreme as when I was strung out on massive amounts of heroin. But this is fentanyl though has this really interesting hook that really, it gets them faster. People seem to get strung out faster, and the potency is much more intense than heroin. However, we also have this other part of that addiction, and that is what's happening in society. We have narratives and messages and a pharmaceutical company that is pushing the solution. And we have medical folks and service folks, and everybody is convinced that people can't.
Yeah.
And so we have those messages going around. And when you have an addict who already looks in the mirror and thinks that they are a complete failure, that they don't know anything, that they've never done anything but destroy their life, they look to people like yourselves and clinicians and doctors as though they are all knowing.
Right.
And that's my argument with lived experience. Hey, look, I appreciate the work that people are trying to do, but if you don't know, you don't know.
Let's
Stop professing that we know, because if this is what I ask folks in different kind of legislative meetings or city council meetings. Well, what was it like for you when you came out of the tent? When you stopped shooting dope, how did you? Well, this is a common comment that's made is, well, I have my own lived experience. I'm sure that you do.
Yeah, it does frustrate me because we like to say in cities like Seattle, progressive cities, people say lived experience all the time. But every person I know who has been through this, who has successfully re-entered, whether we're talking about homelessness or incarceration or addiction or whatever, nobody has said, I wish you had left me there.
Right.
Or, I have
so
never
that I could
ever
figure
heard
it
that.
out.
Yeah, never.
So one of the and I think the frustrations that we're all recognizing, and as society tries to deal with this topic, comes again from this lack of understanding of what addiction is. And so while it's true that we love chocolate cake and we love chicken and those kinds of things, the reality of it is that it doesn't have the negative consequences. Right. So to me, addiction is when we're compelled to an action that has very obvious and severe consequences that we know. So let me ask you this question.
And then you cannot not
participate
in the relationship. It's an intimate relationship with a destructive force.
That part I really like. That's a great way to put it. But here's the question that I have. In the throes of addiction, the addict is drug seeking all of the time.
Oh yeah.
To use and will commit whatever crime and do whatever needs to be done to get that drug. But I want to ask this. In those moments, doesn't the addict simultaneously know I'm probably going to die? This is probably going to it's already messed my life up. And we talk about the warm hug. Well, unfortunately with addiction, most of the time, folks lose the people closest to them in their families, in their relationships. They lose jobs, they lose houses, they lose all these things. But at what moment, in the mind of an addict, what is the moment? Are there moments where that person says, "I need to not use this drug. Like I need to stop. This is ruining my life, or I'm going to wind up dead or in prison"?
First, I want to say that, yes, the fact that the drug is probably going to kill me has definitely crossed my mind, and I definitely don't care. Because like when I was talking about looking in the mirror, right, and seeing all of the things and disqualifying myself as a human being, typically when the relationship has gotten that intense with the drug, like the concern for my longevity does not exist. Yeah. I was on a mission to take myself as close to death as possible when I was doing drugs. And I was shooting heroin and cocaine at the time and smoking a lot of crack. And so, but that was part of the thrill for me. I hated myself. People don't do those kind of
Yeah.
things to their lives when they really value and appreciate themselves. And so,
Well, it looks always like an escalating cycle to me, you know, that there's self-loathing associated. And it frustrates me when the medical community says, you know, you never want to remand somebody to treatment because they're likely to exit, use again, and die. They've lost their tolerance. And I always feel like, sure, if you don't address any of this other stuff,
Right.
if I go back to the same circumstances, now I'm sober and there is nowhere to hide, right? What I hear from people is intense regret and shame and grief. The years that you lost, the people that you failed, you have to square up with that, which sounds excruciating to me.
oh yeah, hard.
So it's like, if you don't address that part, then why would you not use again? If you think your life has no value.
Yeah.
Or somebody said to me yesterday, who's a peer who does outreach work, and I was asking about compassion fatigue. Basically, are you redlining? You know, are you taking care of yourself? And he said, I think he's been sober for 13 years. He said, I think the first few years, maybe I was atoning, you know, that it was almost masochistic, the lengths he was going to for other people. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. And some of what you were sharing, that's when the clarity happens, is when the separation occurs, right? And I want us to think about it like this. So all of that regret, all of those frustrations comes from, it's kind of like all of the garbage that comes in, we're just shoving it to the side in the living room, or shoving it to the side in the living room when we're doing the drugs, right? Yeah. And so we've avoided all these hard things. So of course, when we stop using the things, then that whole pile of trash is still there.
The backlog.
Right? So it's all there. And we have to, and that's why I am aggressive with my guys in prison. We learn how to do hard things, because once we clean up that trash pile, the whole entire goal is to pick up the pieces as we go and not continue to throw them over in the pile, right? Because otherwise we end up in the same situation.
Right.
But when we learn how to navigate, when we learn how to do better, we do better.
Yeah.
And so everything that an addict is trying to avoid is right on the other side of the drugs. Mind you, I told you I worked in one of the largest nonprofits in Washington State, in Seattle, for a number of years, and I worked with a lot of really very well-intentioned, very intelligent, young do-gooders who really believe that compassion means accommodating the desires of the addict or the person, and that's just really not it. Compassion is teaching somebody how to fish, not giving them the fish that you've had in the freezer for the last 5 years.
Ginny, you know, I say all the time, what if it was your person? What if this was your son?
Yeah.
You know, or even as a parent, if you're trying to change a behavior, there is going to be accountability. There is going to be a consequence, but it's not so that somebody sits in shame for 20 years. It's you're trying to change the behavior.
Right.
What I worry about when I'm out with different teams, I think, what is the message to somebody? This is the best we can hope for you, is that you use a less lethal drug for the rest of your life. I worry about that message.
You should. It's a terrible message.
I don't know why nobody's talking about it.
That's say you're not. I talk about it all the time, but you know, the people that consider themselves to be on the top of the totem pole don't want to hear what I have to say, or people like me. And they tend to place this whole concept of lived experience with people that are in the throes of, not people who have actually overcome.
Yeah.
And I will say, and God bless all of my peers who work for the social services, but there's a level of indoctrination that occurs. And there's risk of losing the thing that's helping them to pay their bills. So they're less likely to come and scream from the rooftops at things that help them get clean. So I try not to demonize or shame. I try not to even get mad at the system, because I think that the system is functioning like the machine that it is. However, how many people are getting better? Because every single person that stops isn't going out and relapsing after staying stopped. My daughter's dad's still alive. He took off after I deliced him and everything else, and got him all healthy and clean. He was having normal conversations with me for the first time in 10 years, where he was actually accepting responsibility for things, and then he took off. Well, he didn't die. So, and the fear that we choose to live in based on somebody else's choices is not helping those individuals to level up.
Yeah.
And I will say, and I feel like Eric can support this, drug addicts commit crimes to pay for their drugs, which means that there are victims landing all over the place. And so why are we not valuing and honoring those folks?
I can support that perspective. So we know that that 5% of the people commit 80% of the crime, and we also know that there's this revolving door, and many of the folks in your program talked about this when we had an opportunity to visit, is that they were in and out of jail, in and out of jail, in and out of jail before they started going in and out of prison, and so we as a society have to figure out how do we help these folks early on so that we don't have all this recidivism,
Right.
and how we have folks that are struggling and conducting themselves in a manner where they are leaving a trail of victims behind them. And to your point,
And self-destructing.
Yes.
And
victimizing themselves.
That's right.
And to your point regarding your own experience, you didn't have the right type of crime to get treatment. Well, that is such a naive perspective to believe that all of the other crimes, not drug crimes, aren't
related to drug crimes.
They're all drug
They're all
crimes.
drug crimes.
Yeah, it's all drug
Yeah.
crimes. Like the percentage of crime that occurs that doesn't have a nexus to drugs is extraordinarily low. And as a society, we don't necessarily understand that. I love the way that you are articulating drug addiction as an intimate relationship. And you even use the word separation to talk about, well, I'm now separated from my relationship with drugs because I'm taken into the carceral system. So those separations, a question that, we're not going to dive really deeply into this right now on this podcast, but it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, so I'm very interested in your perspective, is how long of a separation do we need before that first intervention? We're going to get into your program, and we're going to talk about folks that are housed for years and years and years in the prison system, and the phenomenal work you're doing to change lives, and it is phenomenal work. But just let's transition a little bit here to like the in and out of jail thing. Like if we were to say, okay, the genesis of this crime was because of drug use or alcohol use, we're going to pull you into separation from that relationship that you have with that drug, and give you an opportunity to set you on a different course so that you're not in and out of jail all of the time. What would the amount of time necessary be for that?
Well, I think that's a really great question, and it's not necessarily a cut and dry answer.
Right.
However, this is sort of my process and what I think would be most effective. We arrest somebody, you give them a chance the first time, right? We do that. We just do that. We do it with our kids, and then they either do well or they don't, and then the next sit down is a little bit longer. And so,
what do you think that chance looks like?
It could look like a couple of different things. It depends on what the history is, right? So if we're talking about a first-time person, but they're familiar with, say, Eric as he's doing his stuff downtown, and he knows that they've been in the mix, and there are some reports, right, that person has come up, then they're released and they have to report to a program that we know is holistic and intentional and assesses deficit and is focused on helping people to stabilize and bolster those areas of deficit, right?
Well, I'm always stressing transparency because now what's happening is we will hand off to services in first response, and I have no idea what happened.
Right.
And
That's
I feel like
because
I
nothing
need to
happens.
be held. We
just
should be
so
held to
just so you know. I mean, and I only know because I worked there, and I know how the transition has happened. And I left the industry in 2019 to go to UW, and that doesn't mean I'm not in contact with all my friends that still work there. And I'll tell you, I'm grateful that I escaped. I'll just say that. Yeah. But then I would say that the person comes back in after the initial arrest, and this is all potentially pre-trial stuff, and then they're held. They're held until they, but this is the thing. Our process has to be the same on the outside as it is on the inside. So everything has to look the same. Services need to be incentivized to function under a specific kind of structure where they're not. We've got to stop focusing on collecting data on how many burritos, blankets, and drug use kits are being given out, and take a look at how many people are engaged in the programs, where they're intentional, where we're assessing deficit, and where we're teaching people how to overcome the things that have been a challenge for them and how to navigate life successfully, not by being dependent on a system, but by being independent and able to participate in the community.
Yeah, I completely agree. I talk all the time about the difference between an output and an outcome.
Right.
And that we do not have outcomes.
Yes.
Right? Outcomes would mean
I
the
love that
cycle
you're
is
saying this
broken.
right now.
Yeah, and there are ways to assess that. And there are also ways to predict it. So,
Right.
I like the drug diversion court here because it's pre-adjudication, because it's comprehensive, and because it's looking, what are the strength of your relationships? Right? Are you maintaining sobriety? Do you
I
have
am a King County Drug Court graduate, by the way.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I was under Judge Canova. And Judge
no
Canova
kidding.
actually told me, he was like, you're not going to succeed. People with a history like yours don't. Well, that's the kind of stuff that makes me want to just,
that would turn him around.
He hugged
too.
me, though. The day that I graduated, he hugged me.
Yeah. Well, it is extraordinary. I mean, I've always said people can change, but some of these folks, again, on paper, you wouldn't think so. Yeah. Actually, it would not be predictable. What pains me, and it's Judge McHale right now, who's presiding, whom I love. But what pains me is that we wait until people are so far gone.
Yeah.
Again, it's like very few people qualify. I think there's 110 people right now in the program.
Well, are there even the right charges to get into drug court anymore?
That's what I'm saying. And I feel like I do validate what I hear from all first responders here and in other places, that there is this strong corollary of substance use, whether it's alcohol or whatever I'm looking at. And so I feel like, why not address that? And I reject the notion that addressing that dependency or addiction is criminalizing the person who's experiencing it. And no, it's not.
It's not.
It's getting them help. And
and this is the thing. If we hold people accountable, the craziest thing is we write policy. It's on paper with words. We can change the policy.
Yeah.
And a person doesn't have to end up with a conviction if they follow through with processes.
That's right.
Period.
That's right.
My favorite word that you just used is accountability, and that's really sort of the interesting dynamic between Amy and I. Is, I'm the justice, she's the mercy, and I think that your program, drug court, the successful programs always have an accountability component, and they always have a teaching, compassionate moment. This idea, this harm reduction.
Accountability is compassion.
Yeah,
I would really like us to
completely
change our thinking about that. Like,
agree.
I don't think those two things are separate.
No, they never should have been. And sometimes people ask me, it's like, how did we get here? And I do think about how earlier in my career, the ACEs study comes out, right? And we start to understand complex trauma, big T, little t. Back when it had a definition, it used to mean something. And so you start to understand, okay, this person who grew up to be a child predator was overwhelmingly likely to have been a victim earlier. And so you can't not have compassion for that. Right. We start to look at, again, what were you set up to do from birth sometimes?
Right.
I worked in the foster care system, and it's like absolutely predictable.
Yeah.
Your story, that is predictable. It's a predictable pattern. And so but we strayed so far away from accountability to say this poor person, there's victimization here. And then we didn't figure out, so how do we help then? You still break the cycle, and it's really hard to break these cycles. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite interventions,
hard but not impossible.
Not at all.
It's hard to climb Mount Rainier too, but I've done it a couple times. You know what I mean?
It's pretty badass.
So
yeah
I know I'm going to take one of my students up this year, but
I love that stuff. That connection to nature, if you haven't had it, is so cool.
Well, and that specific piece, me going into the mountains, especially by myself, has put together back the fragmented pieces of who I was and helped me to learn coping skills, and that I can do anything I say that I can.
Yeah, that's something that I keep stressing when people ask me about mental health, especially with kids. Like, we need access to things. We need sports, and we need mentors, and we need, for 100%. Me, it was music. We
need to stop focusing on sitting still with a device in their face and thinking that sitting around talking actually helps to move those things around, because it is action and physical activity and healthy eating, and all of those things are some of the key components that are necessary for us to heal our country.
Yeah, and I think too, feeling like you're loved when you're at your worst, being held to account.
Yes.
I think we're completely overlooking that and trying to replace the village connection, family, self-belief, hobbies, passions with an hour of therapy. Right. So I never want to diminish, clinical work. I think it's valid. But again, I don't know of a success story where it was that hour where you turn things around and changed your life.
Unless the therapist knows how to instill those kind of behaviors and qualities.
The other behaviors, right? But I remember when you and I spoke last summer, I was talking about the brain. And this is the value really of neuroscience in this space, that we understand everything's bidirectional.
Yeah.
So fake it till you make it, that's real.
Right.
If
Act
I
your
want to
way into a new way of thinking.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. If I want to be a good person, I have to start pretending like I'm a good person
Do
and
what
acting
good
like it.
do what
Yeah.
good people do, and that's
Yeah.
what has helped me throughout this last 12 plus years. Is that I placed myself in environments and I started to do the things that the people that possess qualities that I wanted to
That's right.
possess, what they did.
Yeah. And then you
So,
become it.
Right.
And that's what's so fascinating. It changes your perspective, your way of thinking, which then again informs and promotes the behavior.
Right.
And so those are the models I see that work.
Can I ask one question before we get to out? Because I can't wait for
Well, and
out,
I actually wanted to respond about the time frame thing.
right?
I was locked up for 6 months last time, and that was what I needed inside. And then I stayed in treatment for 3 years after. I think that the amount of time varies based on where the person is. However, it truly is 10 miles in and 10 miles out. You can't undo 40 years
Yeah.
of stuff in 28 days, right? So I think that, it really depends, but I really think it's imperative to have the components of, what I'm doing without, what other programs are doing that are successful. And when I say successful, that means people who are exiting out, graduating the program, and actually living a life worth living, where they have autonomy and agency and independence to move freely in the world, regardless of what's going on around them, and that they're contributing members to their communities. And so I just wanted to go back and respond to that timeline.
I appreciate that. Obviously this is something that's very challenging, because you can't compel someone who's not convicted to stay somewhere for 6 months. And so
you can if there's a judge involved.
Well, exactly.
And what I can tell you about that too is that just because when I was arrested in the back of the cop car last time, no, my addict was like, oh, hell no, this is crappy. I had drugs in my bra. And they didn't find them on the strip search. So if you think I didn't do them, I definitely did.
Right.
Because I don't know a good drug addict that doesn't do the drugs that they accidentally bring into jail. So, but it took a period of time for the clarity to happen. And as the fog cleared, I became more and more aware of what I didn't want to do to my life anymore. So you can be compelled for those changes to occur.
All right. Last question before we get to out.
Yeah,
Because
sorry.
out, we got to talk about out.
Self-determination.
Yeah, like
that
self-determination. Amy has used this example before, and I love it, so I'm going to steal it. If someone is going to jump off the Aurora Bridge, we go lights and sirens to that. We
100%.
get there as quickly as we can. We
It's a
try
good
to do
example.
everything that we can do to keep that person from jumping off of the bridge. However, we'll go to somebody who's just overdosed. We'll shoot them with Narcan. And then we'll send them on their way. And say, hey, here's somebody to talk to if you care about it. If you care to. That's not what we do with somebody who's going to jump off the bridge. We try to save them, and then we take them and we involuntarily commit them to treatment, because we know that they're in a place that's going to ultimately lead to their death.
That's right.
And there is absolutely no intellectual difference between the addict who is overdosing and is going to kill themselves than the person that's about to jump off the bridge, and yet we treat them very, very differently. So I'm curious about, what do you think about autonomy, and what do you think about harm reduction? And then we're going to talk about out.
Well, I appreciate that. So an example that I use is like if there was a guy sitting on the corner stabbing himself repeatedly with a knife, would you just walk past him and act like that wasn't happening? So I like the fact that you talked about a jumper, because it's the same exact concept. No, we would take that person, put them inside of a hospital, surround them with support, assess their problems, and we would help them to get the services they need before we allowed them to be in a more supported place where they could actually function in public, right? So, and that is one of my challenges with what we're doing with drugs today. So I just want to say this. You guys ever been intoxicated? You ever been drunk?
Never.
I once.
So when you're drunk, like if you are super drunk.
He's drunk right now.
You don't know what's in here.
Right. So if you're intoxicated and, somebody like, especially if you're like super drunk and you're in that IDGAF kind of mode, right? What is the likelihood that somebody's going to be able, and you've talked to lots of people drunk in your work, I'm sure, who you cannot penetrate that individual.
Yep.
Yeah.
But what happens when they wake up the next morning? The next morning, they're a little remorseful. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. So if we're waiting for the individual who is perpetually under the influence of a drug like fentanyl and then who is offered Suboxone and methadone to come out on the other side of that, because let's just keep it all the way real. Suboxone and methadone are narcotics. They are synthetic opioids. You can overdose on both of them. So if we're transitioning them from one toxic chemical to another, do we really think that they're going to find that place of clarity?
Yeah.
So that moment, that aha moment, isn't going to happen when they're under the influence. Okay, and then another thing that happens is when you're dope sick, that's when the clarity starts to occur. But when you first become dope sick, you are so uncomfortable that all you want to do is find the drug.
Yeah.
How cheap is fentanyl?
Yeah.
How cheap is it?
Yeah.
You can get blues for like what, $1 or something like that on the street. And so it doesn't take much to panhandle $1 today.
Yeah.
So the person isn't separated from the problem long enough. That's one of the reasons that I am such a strong proponent of arrest and incarceration, because at least we know that the clarity is happening. And unless, of course, we're pumping them full of mat drugs, which leads to your next question. How do I feel about harm reduction? I feel like it's another distorted concept. I think that it's a policy that has turned into a funnel that goes directly into the pharmaceutical companies. We all have these issues with pharmaceutical companies about the opioid epidemic, but we're watching them do the same exact thing with Matt. I was buying lots of Suboxone when it was being studied at the University of Washington in 2002 before I got clean, and those things get you loaded. Almost every single person that I know that is on Suboxone or has done Suboxone says the same thing. They get you loaded. They are abusable. They are sellable. They are tradable. Methadone, the same thing. I've covered some stories on these things. I am not a supporter of the way that harm reduction is being rolled out today.
Don't you think it's the interpretation or the misinterpretation?
100%.
Because I fully support
We
MAT,
have grossly
but I just,
distorted so many things right
Yeah.
now. And what it's doing is it's financially benefiting a lot of these agencies that are pumping this stuff out.
Yeah.
A friend of mine sent me a picture of a kit that is given out from one of the local social service agencies in Olympia. There's a crack pipe. There's a meth pipe, there's Brillo, there's syringes, there's everything you need to make sure that you get high really easily. Harm reduction was rolled out initially because of HIV and hepatitis C with needle exchanges. And when I was strung out, I happily went to the needle exchange and I exchanged my used syringes for clean syringes. I can support that kind of harm reduction. I think naloxone is necessary because if somebody ODs, it can save their life. But there has to be intervention. There has to be.
No, that's right. Again, it's directional. Somebody should be better off in 6 months and much better off in a year. What do you think about the injectables now, Sublocade and...
I have heard that there are no withdrawals, which I watched one of my students who you guys met. He had been on Suboxone for 11 years. His plan was to go on Suboxone again. And we talked about how many times he had been in prison in between that 11 years and how effective that process was for him as a treatment program. And he let me know that he was actually on Sublocade when he came into the program, and which made sense because he was gray and pasty and he looked kind of weird. And then now he doesn't look kind of weird. And he had 0 withdrawals coming off of it. So if we support a substance, but I've also heard that it's like $2,500 a month for one shot.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, none of these things are being utilized as a transitory method of withdrawal.
And again, that's what I want.
Right.
You know, I thought about
They should
it.
be kick drugs. Those are
Simplistically, I thought about it
kick
like a
drugs.
nicotine patch, you know,
Right.
that
You don't
often it
stay
is
on them
easier.
forever.
Yeah, that it's easier to step down.
There's a process.
Yeah.
There's a program. And so if I were to support any of them, it would be the shot, because there's not an overarching dependence on it because you want to get high or you can't sell it.
Again, I think about the way we have patterned behavior, right? That is actually changing the pattern, that I'm not doing this every day. And I have talked to people in recovery where they talk about that. It's like, okay, it's the 4th day, you know, trying to focus. Don't do this today. So back to out now. We have to get to my favorite.
Okay, let's talk about out.
I swear to God, Ginny, I left that experience with you, and I've had some great experiences, inspiring experiences, thinking I will never forget this. I mean, it was that impactful. So describe for us what this program is, who is electing into it, why the design, again, why is it optional, things like that, and why you think it works.
Yeah. So in 2012, when I was arrested on December 5th of 2012. My clean date is December 6th of 2012. I started to recognize, I had lived in purgatory for a really long time. I sat around waiting for the system to save me and fix me and somebody to help me and all this kind of stuff. And here I was again, looking at myself in a little metal mirror, looking at my 4th prison sentence, and had no idea how it was going to be a minimum of 5 years. And I said, something's got to change. I recognized that I had to turn things around, that I was my problem. And so I started to implement a process. I started to develop and implement a process about changing thought processes and changing behavior. I then read the psychiatric journal of Albert Ellis, who is the creator of REBT, when I was in RJC, because I was elected. I was able to elect into the King County Drug Court. And the woman that I was working with had this really thick psychiatric journal. And so I read it, and it was really effective. And so I kind of piecemealed together a process because, again, drug court was one-dimensional. And I knew that I didn't want to end up back where I was. I didn't want to be loaded ever again. And I had to recognize that I was the problem. So I went to work for a reentry program, and then I went to work for Catholic Community Services. And I was like, I am killing my own people. Then I went to UW, and then I, got a bunch of accolades, became a Truman Scholar and all that. And then I went to work for a program in San Diego, and same problems. There was exploitation of the individuals being served. The individuals being served were overly dependent on the program. And I ended up coming back to Washington, and I wrote a program. I developed a curriculum. I developed the curriculum based on what I implemented in my own life. And I had been clean at that point that was 2022, so 10 years. And I've just put it down on paper, and I started pitching to places. And I ended up with a contract with the Department of Corrections. So mind you, I had run 2 separate community cohorts to test out the process. And what I was experiencing was that people were having the same kind of experience that I did, which was assessing our thought processes, being able to turn those things around, dissecting our whole entire everything, taking a look at who we wanted to be, how we ended up where we were, recognizing the qualities that were present in our lives that helped us to get to where we were, right? And then being able to just rebuild based on what we wanted our life to look like and support each other through that process. And it was effective. And then I pitched to DOC, and I started teaching inside of the prisons. And so far, like over the last 18 months, we've had 57 people graduate from the program. And we've had 12 people released into the community. Inside of the prison, and you guys got to experience a lot of this, we have folks who have been locked up for a really long time that are continuing to be TAs in the program. We're teaching people how to assess, dissect, rebuild, and, and flourish. And that's what we're trying to do from a lived experience perspective. And so based on what we're seeing right now, it's working. Like, even if somebody's going back, have you strengthened and bolstered any of your deficit areas, right? Because that's really the key. The key, of course, is the whole large data point of recidivism. But as you and I have talked in the past, I can't really look at recidivism as a realistic data point anymore because of the law changes that we've experienced.
We were just arguing about this.
Arguing.
Because he was like, no, it's better in Washington. And I was
It's only better in Washington because we're not arresting people because we've changed our laws. But what we're not doing is...
that's one way to lower recidivism.
Have we... I mean, I guess it's
not illegal anymore.
Well, it's like reducing poverty by lowering the threshold of poverty.
Right, but we've seen an increase in homelessness and drug use and overdose. And we're looking at those 2 environments as silos, and we can't do that.
So what are the basic foundational components about? What is the philosophy about?
First of all, that anybody can accomplish anything that they set their mind to. And if we utilize lived experience to show what's possible, like we instill hope in ways that nothing else ever could. And I don't know if that's actually a philosophy, but that's really sort of what it is that I do. And
what does OUT stand for?
Overhaul through unrelenting transfiguration. So we know what an overhaul is. When I think of an overhaul, I think of like a big semi-truck, right? Because it's like, oh, we got to overhaul the truck. You go in and you take the whole entire engine apart. You look at what's working, what's not working. You look at what needs to be replaced, what you're going to keep. So so overhauling, we're just going in and we're taking a look at everything and we're cleaning it up, we're getting it ready, unrelentingly. Yeah. All of the things that are hard to look at when we get clean, we're just going to look at those things because there's so much value in being able to say, yeah, I did that. I did that. And then understanding that the fact that I did that is going to be a blessing in somebody else's life because we're going to be able to go back and help somebody else change that. Yeah. And then transfiguration. And so we think about a caterpillar coming out as a butterfly. And when we do that overhaul and we do it without ceasing, what happens is what we see emerge is who we were always meant to be in our heart. Right? The person that we were supposed to be. And who is to say that all of the things that we've experienced are bad? And I try to stay away from the words good and bad because I think that things just are.
I always say useful. Everything can be useful. Yeah. Yeah. And I do think, again, as a society, we've lost sight of that there's post-traumatic growth. Yeah. That what we contribute, generally, it's forged in the mistakes and the hard stuff and the lessons. Yeah. And again, you are a force. You are a force for good now. And you could not be had you not had these experiences. So I think reconciling this idea, one of the things that struck me when I was listening to these men, so, I mean, how many guys did we listen to? It was probably like 35, 40. Yeah. Share their stories, how long they had been there, what they planned to do next. Thematically, so many of them talked about, I am not a victim. And that really captured me because I thought, well, no, on paper you are. It's just like you. Mm-hmm. Ginny, that is categorically a victimization story, your young 100%. Childhood. And yet you're
People
the one to
love
say
the train
that
wreck too. That's like their favorite part.
Right. It's just such a fascinating reframing to go, stuff happened to me. I was dealt this hand. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. It happened. And then
I actually think it was intentional. Yeah. Because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today without that experience. I wouldn't be who I am. Yeah. So I'm grateful.
I think that's what you're doing is that you are helping people to attach to the heroics, actually, of being able to do that hard work. I've told Eric, I think recovery communities, folks who have been formerly incarcerated and are doing well, are the most joyful rooms I am ever in. It's like this,
most totally industrious, often the most accountable, the most loving, honest. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, because when I have run my life through the dirt, through the grease and the gunk and the muck, and I come up out of that, like there is nothing but joy to be had. That doesn't mean that we don't have hard days, right? Yeah. Right. Everything I'm doing today is just a replacement of choices on the same framework that were present that I used to advance my addiction. Like, it's all transferable skills. It really is. It's just like, and that's what I try to teach my guys. And that's the same. I promise you that all of your guys' qualities, if you guys had ended up being criminals and drug addicts, like you would have used the same framework that you have. Yeah, same person. You would have just had some different behaviors on top of it, right?
So he's smiling because I told him the quote the other day that the difference between a cop and a criminal is a badge.
100%.
Then again, when you look at the studies like psychopathy, there's a pretty fine line there.
Well, this is the thing. We have to understand each other to avoid each other and to find each other. So we probably think a bit alike. And so, and I say that, I have a lot of law enforcement friends today, and I say that because we're aligned.
But I think that the story I hear often, it's lost. It's not in the ether. It's that cop saved my life.
Yes.
Or like our friend Tom, I would be dead. I would be dead. I would have lost everything had it not been for that intervention. And I get to see all the time that it really is the officer who is extending the most compassion, the most kindness, trying to help. And often there's just no system to refer to. Right. It's very frustrating if you are in any kind of helping profession.
I just think that goes to the fact that accountability is an important component. We need to have compassion. We need to be able to provide people the support and the tools necessary to be successful, but there has to be an accountability component to it. So I want to ask you, the back of your sweatshirt says no victims. What are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about because I'm a volunteer. I volunteered for all of it. Yeah. We all do. the guys don't get to come into my class and talk about how it's the system's fault and how it's that broad that I was with before or whatever. And oh my gosh, those are some of my favorite conversations. We end up taking the whole class where I'm like, well, let's talk about that. So I was talking to somebody just last week. He was talking about how the reason that he went to prison the second time was because of this fentanyl user. I said, so the fentanyl user committed a crime and blamed you? Oh, no. They needed fentanyl. And so I went into this thing. I was like, so it was your choice that landed you in prison. So, and that's really what the no victims is, right? It's like, you weren't a victim of somebody else's desire, need, or want. You were a volunteer, and we put ourselves, everything that happens in my life is based on a choice that I've made. That's really what the no victims is recognizing, becoming accountable for ourselves. And I think personal accountability is one of the most important forms of accountability that there is. And that's what I try to teach.
Do you think that someone can beat addiction if they're not accountable to themselves?
That's a hard question. I don't know that anybody ever beats addiction. So do I think that somebody can stop using if they're not accountable to themselves? I mean, probably yes. But what is their quality of life going to look like is the question. How are the things going to manifest? Because I know some pretty dirtbaggy people that don't use drugs anymore, right? But they still sell drugs or whatever the case may be. So, and so that's where the quality of life thing sort of comes in. So I definitely think people can stop using drugs if they choose to stop using it. And that's the fact of the matter. You can not do anything or do anything if you choose it. Right? And that's a huge part of what I teach in Out is like, what do you want? What are you choosing? And that's one of the things too, like what the overarching sort of goal or value system with Out is that, hey, I'm not going to promise you that your life is going to look amazing. That's going to be based on your choices. But we're uncovering the truth so that as you continue to choose moving forward, you are making an educated decision in anything that you choose to do.
Yeah. So what's the first step? When somebody joins the Out program, what does that look like? And how does that start? And how long is it?
Yeah. So, well, in order to even be able to join, you have to attend an info session. I will travel to whatever prison and I do an info session. Usually I'll bring either Out graduates or other people who work for Out. And then inside the prison, somebody will sign up through their counselor. Then they come and they attend the first soft start session. And then we give an assessment. And the assessment is pretty in-depth. We cover a number of different areas because I cannot track outcomes if I don't first understand where deficits exist, right?
Yeah.
Because if you two are both coming into a program and you come from a great home and you come from a broken home, your guys' deficit areas are going to be different. Right. So if you get out and you do things that are naturally, foundationally built in you, and you don't have any struggles and you get out and you don't do well, your components are going to be different. And so we can't really gauge your outcomes from the same perspective, if that makes sense. Right. So we start with assessment, and then the program itself is 26 weeks. I have a workbook that I've created. Yeah, so we meet every week for 2 hours in class. It's just like a university class. We come in, we lecture, we go over the work that's been done. We do some lesson plan stuff in the class, and then I send them out with homework. They come back with the homework done the next week. And the work is doing the homework out of the book. It's also service projects, and I make people do things that make them really uncomfortable. If you don't want to do the work, then you don't want to be in the class.
I loved the service component. I thought that was so cool. One of the guys came up to me after, and I didn't know what he wanted to talk to me about, but it was this charitable work that he was doing and whether or not I would circulate.
Oh, David.
Yeah, and I was like,
David.
oh my God.
Yeah.
But I do think service is so healing.
It
is. I mean, my mom, if I was ever feeling sorry for myself, she was like, why don't you go help someone else?
Yeah.
That was just
go volunteer,
very practical.
Go do something.
Yeah.
And because the antidote to me is helping somebody else. Yeah. Truly is. And we're a self-centered species. We might not be much, but we're all we think about, right? Yeah. So, and that's just true for every single human being. But specifically for addicts and criminals, like we've taken a lot. And we also like to silo ourselves in little cliques and communities inside a prison. And so my favorite service component is that they have to go help somebody that they wouldn't normally talk to. So you have a whole bunch of people with ego that are murderers or whatever, and they don't want to talk to somebody with a sex offense, and they come in and they're very very vocal about it. And I'm like, okay, well then go help a sex offender. So I push guys to do things that they don't like, that they're very uncomfortable with. And yeah, and I appreciate it. So
It was cool how many mentioned vulnerability too.
Yeah.
Again, like these guys, I wouldn't think they would know the
Big, tough
word.
guys.
Yeah. It was really inspiring.
they tend to drive themselves pretty hard to graduate and to accomplish things. They really pride themselves on mentoring and working with each other. You know, everybody wants to be a TA. And then they want to be connected with our community as we go out. You guys got the opportunity to meet some of the community partners. We have a host more. We have folks that are mentoring, helping people open up and develop businesses. It's really a beautiful experience. We've seen racial segregation walls drop down. We've seen gang ties really drop down. And what we have now, we're developing community with people that treat each other like brothers inside of these institutions. And the prison loves the work that I'm doing, and they're fighting pretty hard to keep me in. And it sounds like DOC headquarters reentry division is trying to put me in more institutions. And so we're applying for that right now.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
So if you could like wave a wand, if you could change one thing, is that what it would be, that you would scale this?
I mean, if I could change one thing, it would be that our prisons and our institutions, our homeless industrial complex institutions, our jails, that this is the model.
Yeah.
That this is it.
Yeah.
That assess, dissect, build up, address, process, serve, that is what we're doing inside of all of these structures, so that we are developing healthy communities where people can contribute and become the very person that they believed that they couldn't be, because I think that spark is inside of everybody.
You know, those folks are going to be released from prison.
Yes.
And they're going to be our neighbors, and they're going to be in our communities.
Right.
And, you know, seeing those men take responsibility for how they got there and the decisions that they made in their lives, and you equipping them with the tools to make different decisions on their own behalf.
Yeah.
You know, that is inspiring. It's what we as a society have always wanted and haven't done a very good job of creating. You are doing phenomenal work. We applaud you. We support you, because it really helps us all to be more successful.
It was really important for my guys to be able, especially to meet you, and to be able to be in the same room with somebody that they thought just because of your profession was some sort of adversary. It's also really important for folks to know that, I'm not defined by the choices that I made. I can actually interact and be in the same room with people that I would have always thought was better than me. So you guys are a really important piece of the village part too. So thank you.
Okay. Well, a year from now, let's talk about how the world changed.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you, Ginny, very much. This has been great.
Thank you, guys.
And now you've been bombarded.
The BomBardened podcast is a Barden Squared production. Executive producers are Eric Barden and Amy Barden, and video and audio production of the BomBardened podcast is by Thread Theory Creative.